Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Rasulullah wa alihi wa sahbihi wa nu'alwa. Inshallah, I just wanted to try to bring together some of the key themes that we touched upon and to look at the urgency and responsibility of the stewardship. And we had a wonderful presentation before, and then Ustadh Amjad spoke on some of the sunnahs of stewardship, of having this sense of responsibility and concern. And if we look back at what the first presentation with Shaykh Ali emphasized, that all our acts are acts of submission to Allah, right? Ibadah, worship or submission, is to make one's action in accordance with the divine command, right? With sincerity. And from this, we have a sense of trust, of amana, right? That moral responsibility, the human being has been granted moral responsibility. We've been created with the subtle and rather mysterious reality of choice. Regardless of what neuroscientists are confounded by at present, we perceive choice, and we are responsible, right? And this is the basis of our khilafah, of our vicegerency on earth, right? That we were granted this choice as a trust, and we have responsibility. You know, as vicegerents on earth, we're entrusted, but we've been commanded by our Lord, and we've been made morally responsible for acting in a particular manner. And we see also that this life is an opportunity to seek Allah, to seek God. How? Through upholding justice, right? Through upholding justice and excellence, in all things and with all things, in all possible ways, right? And this is the prophetic way. It is upholding excellence with all things, in all ways. And this command to Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan, that truly God commands to justice and excellence. The least you can do is be just. And what is justice? Justice is to give others their due. Right? Another very interesting definition of justice is to put things in their right places. So they even have expressions in classical Arabic like hair that has been wronged. Right? Why? Because it's out of place. And interestingly, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, whoever has hair should honor it. Meaning that brush your hair once in a while. So this, but this is the underlying overall responsibility. There are some underlying values related to this sense of responsibility and trust. The first two are that the very foundation of our responsibility, right, and there's this word that, people are freaked out about, Sharia, which is divine guidance, right, which is simply religious guidance. And guidance has come to uphold two principles, which are the avoidance of harm and the preservation of good. Any religious understanding that goes against this, we would hold it to be a misunderstanding. Is in anything that you do, in any choice that you make, avoid harm. Do not harm yourself, and do not harm others. Do not harm anything. Right? And to promote good and to preserve good. And both of these have many corollaries. Then, the third underlying ethical value is that you recognize that everything has a right, and you fulfill the rights of all things. And above and beyond that, you strive to have excellence with all things. Ustadh Amjad mentioned this, the important prophetic practice of naming one's possessions. Because having a planned obsolescence and having a disposable society is contrary to prophetic teachings. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, named his shields and his cups. He had various cups, and each cup had a name. Because things matter. And this is excellence with all things. What you buy has consequences. You appreciate it, right? And you take care of it. And likewise with everything around one. Related to these is avoiding excess and avoiding waste, both of which in small amounts are morally disliked, they're makruh, and gross excess, gross waste is sinful. Right? It is sinful. It is no less bad than missing prayer or deliberately leaving a fast. And with this, we have an overarching ethical commitment to something expressed so beautifully by the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, which is to have beautiful balance in all our pursuits. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, summarized beautifully how we approach life, work, and everything. He said, اتقوا الله وأجملوا أيها الناس وأجملوا في الطلب. That be mindful of Allah, O people, and pursue all matters with beautiful balance. And ijmal is pursue the things, whether it's your work, whether it be something you want to purchase, your consumption, your relationships, everything with beautiful balance. Ijmal is to have restraint, right? Not to have excessive avidness, but at the same time not to be lax, not to pursue with greed or avarice, with lack of concern for others. فَأَجْمِلُوا فِي الطَّلَبِ. It's a beautiful expression. So pursue all matters with beautiful balance. And a beautiful balance is a balance in which you seek good for yourself while seeking good for others, with due consideration of what is pleasing to God. Right? And you make it and you pursue it in a manner that would uphold truth, beauty, dignity, mercy, good. So this is an underlying commitment the believer has. Right? And this applies how do you work, about work-life balance, about restrained consumption, etc. Right? That, okay, should I? Yeah, there's already people I know who are thinking about the iPhone 7. And the same people had the conversation about the iPhone 6 Plus and the iPhone 6. Some of them have actually admitted, with most of the incremental upgrades, that I haven't noticed a single difference. But got to get the new one. So they're already planning that. How much do you think the iPhone 6S Plus, whatever they have, would sell for? I said, check online. I said, do you have an idea? And they're already saying it's still not due for another 3 months. Don't ask me why, I know. And at the same time, have you considered all the related considerations? Right? So the believer has this underlying consideration. The sense of responsibility of the believer, right, that what are we going to do about it? Right, what are we going to do about it? We have to understand that as believers, we have two levels of responsibility. What we're responsible for in life relates to our personal or individual responsibility, or our personal or individual obligations. This is called the fard ayn, what is personally obligatory for you, whether in worship or in the matters related to your personal conduct of remaining within limits with respect to the lawful and prohibited in our work, our consumption, the rights of others, etc. These are personal responsibilities, but these are not the only responsibilities. We also have a share of collective responsibility as a moral obligation. These are called the fardul kifaya, our collective obligation, or our personal share of collective obligation. And the preservation of every good and the prevention of every harm in life is a collective obligation. The preservation of every good, whether it be every spiritual good or every worldly good, is a collective obligation. And the prevention of every harm, whether it be spiritual harm or worldly harm, is a collective obligation. But the collective obligations are more difficult because how much of them are you responsible for? It's intangible. Because your personal obligations are obvious. Do no harm, right? Do what's right in your own choices. But you are one part of a far greater whole, as was presented to us so eloquently, right? And you have a share of responsibility for all that preserves good, for everything in existence, and that prevents harm for everything that is in existence. But you are responsible to the extent of your circumstances and abilities with respect to the collective good. So the collective good is the greater moral test on you, the greater moral test. Because the personal duties are obvious, and you do them, and they're just an expression of personal self-awareness. That if you know what's ultimately good for you, you would fulfill them. But that's not all. Right? We have to all think very carefully that what is my share of collective responsibility of these what are called the social obligations or the collective obligations, the fard kifaya, and what am I actively doing for these to be fulfilled? So when it comes to our concern for the environment, one can summarize that our personal responsibility is firstly to uphold concern for creation in the way we view what is around us. Right? Uphold concern for creation in your outlook. Right? That what is this? Right? To deal right with things, you have to see things the way they truly are. These aren't just consumer items that, I remember when I was finishing high school, my dad purchased the computer, and I really didn't want him to do it. I thought I knew which computer to get, and I did, to be honest. And he got a 286, this creaking slow device. Although at that time, the 386 had come out. But we got this from this Chinese store in North York, near what's now Yorkdale Mall. And the thing just wouldn't die years later. So I'd always just lift it up. They said, beware of dropping the computer, especially when it's being turned on. So when we turned on, I'd raise the computer, 5 inches. I'd say, okay, on, oh! And it would fall, hoping it would break so we could get a new one. And my dad's very much old school. If it ain't broke, don't buy a new one. And it lasted till my dad said, this is getting slow. And he got one, right? But we don't see things as just disposable items. Or, well, I have the money to buy a new one. Who needs a new pointer? Who needs the same old pointer? The little holes at the back are wearing off. It works fine. It's actually better than most new models. 7 reasons. But, well, there's a new flashier one. Just throw this one away. Okay? Or, even when we give things to charity or whatever, a lot of the things we give away, others wouldn't use. So we see things as being creation. They're created by Allah. They're created by God. And we see them as creation. Right? And we see these as being blessings. We see these being blessings. As there being a trust. Right? This is God's creation. Right? So this is very important. Because if we don't see it as what it is, then we're just governed by me, myself, and I. And what do I do, and what do I want, and what do I, quote unquote, need, and we plod away. That's one. So see things right. The second is that once you see things right, how do you deal with them? We uphold the ethics of concern in our personal conduct and to strive for excellence therein. Why? Because how we conduct ourselves with any of these circumstances and things that Allah has created, that God has created, is an opportunity of closeness with Allah. And what are these ethics of concern? We talked about some of them earlier, and we'll reiterate, right? Like, do not harm anything, do not waste anything, prevent harm, promote good, etc. And we'll look at those. But that's not all your responsibility. They say, okay, I won't waste, I won't do this, I won't do this. That's not all that you're responsible for. It goes beyond that. That there is collective responsibility. There is collective responsibility, and this too is not just a good thing to do. Because honestly, a good thing to do, you don't really need to do. Why do you have to do the good? To be honest, I've always been lazy. Like, if I don't have to do it, I won't. Seriously. It's actually, beware what you hear when you're young. But I heard this joke when I was young, and it really affected me. Or just corresponded to the way I am. So, is that there's this kid who had exams coming up, and he didn't study for them. So his father came. He's actually reading jokes about exams when I had exams coming up. Partly to console myself, because I got in trouble. I was playing some karate game with my door locked, and my dad knocked, and he heard me playing this karate game, so I got told off. So then I decided to open a book, but it was like this great big fat book of jokes, and there's jokes about exams. So one joke was that this kid wasn't studying for his exams, so we were like in virtual company at that time. His father comes and tells him off and says, "Son, study, because hard work never killed anyone." So the kid said, "Dad, I don't want to be the first one." Right? So, right? Like, why in the world would you do something if you don't need to do it? And a lot of people have this. That, yeah, I'd buy organic, but they just see it as something above and beyond. It's a nice thing to do. If it feels good, do it. But it doesn't feel good, because most of us are, we care about our money. The human being is a needy creature, and food, and money is hard to let go of. But rather, these matters related to having concern for the environment, for the animals, for the well-being of everything, of the water, plant life, animal life, other human beings, everything, that this is from our personal share of collective responsibility, of what is fard kifaya. So there, one is promote and advocate concern for creation, as creation. Right? And this is from our calling ourselves and others to God, is that this is God's creation. It is a trust. It's not a light matter. And in this sense of concern, we need to have partnership with those who share that concern. They may be driven by other perspectives towards that concern. But we see that this is a coming together in shared concern. Yeah, and this is an obligation, right? The preservation of all good and the prevention of all harm from everything in creation is a collective responsibility. And when that collective responsibility is not being fulfilled by others, in so many ways, we have to ask, what is my share of the fulfillment of that responsibility? Right? But promotion and advocacy is not sufficient. One also must ask oneself, how am I actively promoting these ethics of concern, of the prevention of harm, the promotion of good, the avoidance of excess and waste, etc.? How will we actively promote these ethics of concern? Firstly, through our own example, but beyond, through our work, right? Through our service and activism. How am I contributing to this good and to the prevention of harm? Whether it be in my neighborhood, in my community, in my society, or globally, right? And this requires deep thought, because we are responsible. We will be asked. It's clear from the prophetic tradition that, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said that by Allah they don't believe, by Allah they don't believe, by Allah they don't believe. And he said, whoever it is in true loss and trouble. And he said, the one who goes to sleep satiated while their neighbor is hungry. And everyone in your neighborhood is your neighbor. Right? But it entails concern for them. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, taught that concern even for animals. Once a cat was trying to drink from a bowl, and it's kind of hard. So he tilted the bowl. And everyone's surprised, like, what's this going on? They say it wasn't a pet cat of his even, right? But this is just caring for every living thing, right? So much so that there's important and detailed guidance on how you slaughter an animal. The Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, tells us that Allah has decreed excellence in all things. So if you slaughter an animal, then slaughter it with excellence. Put the animal at rest and sharpen your blade. And there's so many different things. The animal should not see the blade before it is slaughtered. The animal should not see animals ahead of it being slaughtered. Right? And there's so many teachings related to that. But we don't wonder that, okay, how was the animal that I ate slaughtered? So it's halal. Right? But halal simply means it's not haram. It is permissible, meaning it is not prohibited. But there are numerous levels of dislike connected to the meat. Right? The meat that most of us eat has many layers of dislikedness. How the animals are slaughtered. And it's not just with halal slaughtered animals. The meat industry, how are chickens slaughtered? Right? Dunking a chicken upside down into a vat of water that's electrocuted isn't exactly fair treatment. But that's how else do you think our chickens are slaughtered? And said, okay, well, its head got cut off. Whether it be by a human blade or mechanically, that's a legal point. But if it's your time to die, I'm sure you wouldn't like to be hung upside down and dunked into some electrocuted water so that you could lose consciousness. And then, right, besides how they're raised, which is prohibited, right? We need to have concern for every good being preserved for God's creation and every harm being prevented. Keeping animals, cutting off their claws and declawing, not to remove their claws, they actually mutilate the chickens, right? Giving them growth hormones, so they grow to full size in a third of the time they naturally do, right? All kinds of things. These aren't just things that, oh, it's so bad, right? Because it's so bad, well, then just ignore it. But this is so wrong, and we do not accept any wrong in any way, right? And we are culpable. Right? Just read about the chocolate that you eat. most of the chocolate that you eat is dirty, right? Like it's stained by the blood, not literally, right? It's stained by the blood of hundreds of thousands of people being oppressed, right? The other crops that are grown, right? There's incredible injustice through which all these things come to us, whether it be to other human beings, to animals, to the environment, and these are very serious matters, right? And this applies not just socially but politically, right? Canada as a country, it's an amazing place to be. And if those of you who went to the camp, I mean, it makes you feel proud that people are so considerate, right? For those of you who weren't there at the camp, there's a very special day, right? The middle of Sha'ban, and many people fast that day. So the camp, our retreat organizers, they just asked if we could have some food because some people will be fasting and they'll be getting up at night. And the staff at the camp insisted and said, no, it's unreasonable expectation to expect people to wake up at 2:30 in the morning to cook for you. And they insisted on getting up and cooking a whole hot meal and serving it just, right? That's amazing. But at the same time, we have to hold our political leaders accountable, right? And, Canada's got the British style of looking good, right? Whereas we have a lot to answer for, right? Our companies have some of the worst environmental records overseas. Actually, per capita, there's no country whose companies pollute more than Canadian companies. I mean, we're just population-wise, we're just so much smaller than the US or China or whoever, but it's incredible. We've destroyed entire aquifers in South America and elsewhere, and we're responsible because this is our country. And the choices made by other citizens here and overlooked or neglected or tacitly supported by our government, it's not just, oh, they did something wrong. We have a sense of responsibility. The fact, the state of just clean water in native reserves, right? I really don't care if our president goes out wearing different kinds of headgear, but if we still don't have clean water in so many native reserves, that matters more than, the parliamentary session opening with some token gestures to our First Nations, right? And we have to actively look at what are we doing in upholding this through the time that we give. So to close, there's a few points that we wanted to just close with, right? Before that, Shaykh Ali had given an important insight, right? That disbelief in the Creator, right, and heedlessness, right, results in so much harm in creation, right? And we have to make that connection that faith must drive us to preserve creation, to promote good, and to prevent harm. How? Right? There's a few things that I wanted to just look at as practical places to test your ethical concern. But before we do that, there's just one last thing, which is that creation has a spiritual purpose. Creation, it's very clear in the Quran that creation has a very significant spiritual purpose. What is the spiritual purpose of creation? Allah Most High tells us in the 3rd chapter of the Quran, in Surah Ali Imran, verse 190 onwards to the closing, that, and many other places in the Quran, that truly in the createdness of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of night and day are numerous signs for those who would reflect. Creation is a sign of its creator. Right? Concern for creation is out of recognition of the creator. Creation, in its createdness, manifests the beauty, the majesty, and the perfection of its creator. So concern and mindfulness for the creator entails concern and mindfulness for his creation. Imagine if you lived in Leonardo da Vinci's time and you're like friends. Hey Leo, what's going on? I just painted this thing about this lady who has a mysterious smile. So, oh great, and you just slashed it. That's not caring for Leo, right? Right? So, because, and that's I'm not advocating for Leo or his art necessarily, but, the creation manifests the beauty, the majesty, and the perfection of its creator. Gratitude towards the creator for having created you, for sustaining you at every moment, recognizing the reality of your servanthood to your Lord entails right response to creation. Right? Entails right response to creation and a sense of urgent responsibility. We should be thinking with a sense of responsibility to God for every choice that we make. That is this a good choice? Is there harm, not just direct but also indirect, in the choices? And there's 7 ethical choices that you should hold yourself accountable for. The first is that make sure your work is ethical. Make sure your work is ethical. That's what you spend most of your discretionary time doing. Right? And the righteous throughout history, and this is not only in our tradition, in other traditions too, the righteous had a huge impact on the world. And a lot of in our tradition, Islam spread across Africa, it spread to South Asia, etc. Not just it wasn't primarily through missionaries, but through traders. And the reason they were trading is because they didn't like the way the marketplace was. Because there's a lot of unethical conduct in the marketplace. But you got to live, right? So you have to ask yourself, is the line of work that you're in wholesome? Now, there's religious guidance related to what is permissible and impermissible. And if your work is permissible in itself, it is permissible for you to engage in. But is working for a company that is selling clothes that are not ethically sourced, that has environmental policies that are polluting streams and rivers, that are depleting aquifers, that have labor practices that are crushing, is it merely permissible? Right? And does it not affect you spiritually? Does it not affect you emotionally? Because if our choices are the cause of grief to others, why would we not find grief in our own lives? That's just the nature of life. Right? So think about your work. Now don't freak out. Seek sound ethical guidance about your work, but anyone with a conscience would be deeply disturbed by much that is out there. What can you say is ethical work in the financial sector? Okay. And to be honest, not much, full stop. Right? Not much. What insurance company is ethical? Right? Right? What multinational is ethical? Right? Right? The answer is dot, like fill in the blanks if you can. Right? So you think about that. But there are numerous opportunities, particularly in the world that we live in, but they've always existed, of going out on a limb, starting your own company, connecting with, seeking more ethical career choices, etc. And plan it, or at least planning to go towards that. Things that are sources of good and that remove harm from the world that we live in. Look at the ethics of the food and drink that you have. Question every single item that you have in your fridge. Where does it come from? How is it produced? Okay. And one of my teachers in Damascus, someone came and asked, these French imported cheeses, Are they halal? Are they permissible? And he looked at him. شو بدك فيه? What do you want with that? He said, take a principle. كل طعام مسته المصانع فهو مشبوه. Any food that has been touched by factories is questionable. You don't need, like, food is something found naturally. Why does food not need to go through a factory? What happens to the food itself, and what's happening in there, and what's added, and who's working? There's all kinds of craziness. But so many things that we take for granted are the result of so much harm, to other human beings, to the environment, etc. And we have to be very careful about that. Right? And one of the things to make ethical choices, don't watch any advertising, whatever. Right? I've spent a lot of time thinking about the ethics of ad blocking, okay? And I still don't have an ethical answer to it. But there's a case to be made for ad blocking. And that's certainly a spiritual case. It'll save you from a lot of toil. Ethical dress. If everyone who's wearing items of clothing that are not ethically sourced took off that clothing, we'd be naked most of the time. Everything from your underwear to your socks, to your shirts, to your pants. If you don't know that it is ethically sourced, it is not. You can just assume that. All those great deals you get is on the broken backs and the blood and shattered bones of people all over the world. Okay? Right? And it's a great deal. It's not. It's the result of grave destruction. And it matters. Why? Because you have, especially when you make a choice, we should be concerned about things that don't relate to us at all. But when you make a conscious choice to buy something, and this was the result of others being harmed, your purchase is not directly sinful, but it is certainly, there is dislikedness in it without doubt. Now we're only responsible to the extent that we're aware, but it's better to have a few items of clothing, but that are wholesomely sourced, that are not source of harm to the environment. Even simple things like the dyes used for clothing, so many of them are terrible chemical dyes. Right? So we should be conscious. And one of the ways, as Ustadh Amjad said, is buy quality items. And there's an increasing movement of social consciousness in consumption. In England, there's this company called, I'm not going to tell you the exact name, but that sells, I think, 40-year jackets. You buy a good English, good jacket, like a tweed jacket kind of thing, and they guarantee that it'll last you at least 40 years. You can hand it over to the next generation. People used to give clothing many generations, and this is a great value. Right? Likewise, these are things we engage in all the time. But more broadly, ethical consumption. Choose on the basis, if you have a choice between which, we should all be troubled by our smartphones. There's all kinds of unethical parts to pretty much every phone. If you don't like, at least you should protest, or at least signal. You go get the iPhone, or God help you, the flagship Android phone. But tell the company, write to them that I purchased your phone. However, as a concerned citizen of this world, I'm very troubled by 1, 2, 3. And encourage other people to do that. Right? And engage in ethical consumption. And whenever there is a choice that prevents harm and promotes good, consider it from your moral duty to incline towards that choice. Ethical disposal. That what do you do with, one, look at how much you're wasting. Look at how much you're throwing away, and should you be wasting it? How should you be disposing? It's not just, okay, well, I recycle. But how much can you reduce of your consumption, of your wasteful consumption? How much food you throw away, etc. So these are all things that the believer is actively thinking of as part of their moral duty. Sixth, and this relates to the sense of social responsibility, the ethical use of time. Right? Because concern is not merely a nice add-on, that if I'm wealthy enough, I'll eat organic meat. If, I'll get ethical clothing once I get ahead. Right? But for now, I'll just go down to the Walmart and buy, they talk about blood diamonds, we should talk about blood clothing. Right? Or, although it has pejorative senses, but bloody clothing. Right? Honestly, like a lot of this consumption is very destructive. Is it ethical? And sorry for a politically incorrect statement. I'll admit that despite my love for proper coffee, is it ethical to be going to Tim Hortons? Right? How are Tim Hortons employees paid? How much profit does this corporation make? And is this ethical? How come it is so cheap? Right? It's not just because God blessed Tim Hortons with, whatever. It's not a charity. Something probably doesn't add up very much. Right? I'm not saying it's unethical, but we should be thinking about our choices. But likewise with our time. Right? We don't have time. Say, well, I don't have time to think about these things. I don't have a time to get involved. I don't have time for this. But you do have time to watch the Real Madrid Atletico game. You do have time to watch every game of the playoffs of the Raptors. Though track record would have told you in advance that don't bother. Right? I'm very happy I didn't watch a single game. Right? You still have time to watch the Leafs, though they've never won from before any of us were born. Even me. Yeah. Even Uncle Rabbani. Right? So, question yourself. One of the things we'll be questioned about by our Lord is our time and how we spent it. It's not just did we spend it harmfully, but did we direct our time and our concern towards fulfilling our social responsibilities? And there are many. You can't fulfill all of them, but did you genuinely strive your utmost to fulfill what you can fulfill? Allah does not make us a soul responsible for more than it is able. We are told in the closing verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, the second surah of the Quran, right at the end, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. God does not make us soul responsible for more than it is able, but you are responsible to the extent of your ability. And that ability arises out of time and how you spend it. Seventh is you must have ethical consciousness, right? That it is only through remembrance and mindfulness that you can be aware that you must consciously make choices that are acceptable, all things considered, to Allah. That you strive to make choices, all things considered, that are pleasing to Allah. You must make choices, all things considered, that are beloved to Allah. Our beloved Messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, said in a saying related to the one quoted by Ustadh Amjad, that Ar-Rahimuna yarhamhum ar-Rahman tabaraka wa ta'ala. It is the merciful who are shown mercy by the all-merciful. Irhamu man fil ard. Be merciful to all that is on earth. Yarhamkum man fis sama. And then the Lord of the heavens will be merciful to you. Innama yarhamullahu min ibadihi ar-ruhama. God is only truly merciful amongst his servants to those who are truly merciful. Okay? So we see this as part of our spiritual concern. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us consciousness of this responsibility and make us uphold what it entails in our lives. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.